Okay, today we're going to have a class on MLA documentation. Hopefully many of you have already had this in English 101, and that today will be a review. So let's recall. MLA documentation involves internal documentation and external documentation. The internal documentation involves parenthetical documentation. Now, the document that I have up on the board, it comes up if you Google MLA documentation. This is the first site that comes up. But there are many sites that include very similar information. So inside your paper, you have to have parenthetical documentation. As it says here, the general rule is to cite the source right in the text of your paper. What types of information do you have to cite? You have to cite any information that you have in your paper that you got from an outside source. That doesn't mean that it's only information that you quote. It can be any information that you didn't know before and that you get from a source. So even if you include information totally in your own words, that is a paraphrase, or you summarize in your own words information from a source, you still have to put in parentheses right after that information some sort of citation that indicates to your reader where you got that information. Now, the usual rule is that if you have the author's last name, that is in MLA documentation, you use the author's last name and the page number. You'll only have the page number if it's a print source or if your source appeared elsewhere in print. If you have a website, then you don't have a page number and all you'll have is the author's last name. When you print something off the internet and it says number 1 out of 5, number 2 out of 5, number 3 out of 5, those numbers 1, 2, and 3 do not count as page numbers. As it says here on the document in front of you, if the author's last name is mentioned in your writing, this is called a signal phrase. You only need to put the page number in the parentheses at the end of the sentence. What does that mean? Let's say you say, according to Cole, hip-hop degrades women. Obviously, we're not talking about hip-hop, but I just read a paper on that subject today. So if you mention the author, this is called a signal phrase. If you mention the author in your paper, then you don't put the writer's name in parentheses. And if it's a website where you don't have a page number, that you won't have anything in parentheses. Now, what happens if you don't have an author? There's a website and it doesn't have an author. Then you use the title of the website. There is always a title. You never use the URL in the parentheses, and you never use anonymous in the parentheses. So again, in the parentheses, if you have an author, you put the author. If you have a page number, you put the page number. If you have an author but no page number because it's a website, you don't put the page number. If you don't have an author, you put the title. There's always some sort of a title at the top of any kind of web page. Let's see what it says here. You may decide not to highlight the source of some of your derived information. In such cases, at the end of the sentence, enclose in parentheses both the author's last name and the page referred to. That is, if you don't want to highlight the author's last name, you just want to include the information like that many Chinese people are superstitious, as it says in many sources or as many critics claim, and you don't want to highlight the name of the author, then you would do it the way it says here. At the turn of the century, many men worked long hours, which, quote, entailed their absence from the family for most of the day. And then you would put the author's last name and the page number. Note that you don't put any little p's, right? You have the author's last name, a space, no comma, and the page number, and no little p. Okay. Now, for publications with no author given, okay, you should include the first 2 to 3 keywords from the title. You should include the whole title, actually, unless it's very long, and then do as they say here, include the first 2 to 3 keywords in the title and the page number if you have it in parentheses. Then it says here, if possible, you should quote or paraphrase material from the original source. So let's say you want to, what they're explaining here is if you are reading a source and they quote Shakespeare, it's preferable to quote from the Shakespeare than to quote the source quoting the Shakespeare. Okay, I don't know if you have any other questions about in-cite citations, that is the internal citations. If you do, I guess, I mean, you can't raise your hand and ask me. I guess you'll have to send me an email. Now, they have this little question here, do I have to document everything? I would imagine for the papers that you're writing here, especially about Chinese culture, Chinese mythology, just about everything you would have to cite, because this is not common knowledge. The general rule is that if something is common knowledge, you don't have to cite it. So for instance, you wouldn't have to cite that Hamlet was written by Shakespeare, because we assume that you know that. But for the papers that we are doing, I would assume that you would have to cite just about everything that you're doing. Now, there's also the external citations. The external citations appear on a works cited page. Now, first of all, how do you write the works cited page? The works cited page always has to be a separate page. So you can't start the works cited page on the bottom of your last page. You have to take a completely new page, completely new page, and you have to write works cited in the middle, exactly as it appears here. The works cited page always has to be in alphabetical order, whether you have an author or you don't. So if you have the author, you alphabetize by the last name of the author. If you don't have an author, you alphabetize by the title, as you see here, parent. Okay. In general, what you do, you write the last name of the author, the first name of the author, period. Now, if it's an article that appeared in a journal, then you put the name of the article in quotation marks. Now, the general rule about quotation marks versus underlining or italics. Now, first of all, underlining and italics are interchangeable. You can always underline or italicize as long as you are consistent. Large things are generally underlined or italicized, and short things are in quotation marks. And that is throughout the paper. So whenever you mention the title of the article, you put it in quotation marks. So let's say you have an article that doesn't have an author, and you cite it by the title in parentheses in your paper, you put that title in quotation marks in the parentheses. Or here on the works cited page, where you do have an author, where you have the title, you put it in quotation marks. The titles of poems go in quotation marks. The titles of chapters go in quotation marks. But the titles of magazines, newspapers, books, plays, they all get underlined or italicized. The names of books, whenever you mention them, they always have to be underlined or italicized. So as you see here, the journal that it's in gets italicized. Then the date, if there is a date, but as you see, it's inverted as 5 March 1999. Then if it came from a database, you put the database, then whether it's web or print, and then the date you accessed it. That you always have. You may not always have a date because it depends whether, let's say you have a website. The website might not have a date on it, but you always have the date you got it. And again, that's inverted. Okay. Whatever website you go on to to see how to do MLA documentation, it will always give you this form. Now, a very, very important thing to remember is whatever appears over here as the first thing is also the thing that has to be in parentheses. The parentheses, the citation in the parentheses, has to match the first thing on your works cited list. So if you can't put one father's unique perspective in your parentheses, because when I see one father's unique perspective in the parentheses, that's the first thing I'm going to look for on your works cited list. And lo and behold, I'm not going to find that. I'm going to find box. So if you have box Scott here, you should have box in the parentheses in your paper. Whatever comes first on the works cited list should come first in your parentheses. If you are listing this as parent, then parent in quotation marks is the way it should be cited in the parentheses in your paper. And one of the biggest things that I will check when I'm checking that you did your documentation correctly is to see that what's in the parentheses matches the first thing that's on your works cited list. Here they give you the basic rules for different possibilities. How do you do a book? Last name of author, first name of author, title of book, city where it was published, colon, name of publisher, comma, year it was published, and print. You will notice something that they used to say to put the URL, and now we don't put the URL anymore. Not, of course not for a book, but I mean later when we get down to the online sources. Print magazines. Now when you get a magazine article from a library online database, last name, first name of author, if there is an author, the title of the article in quotation marks, the name of the magazine. This is the one we just looked at. Notice. Okay? This is this. The name of the database, the date of issue, the date of the name of the database, and the date of access. No URL. And web pages, they give you other different possibilities. So they don't. Where are the examples here? It's usually the same way, except that you probably won't have a database. If there's an author, you put it, the date, the title of the web page, and then the date of the web page if there is one, and the date of access. Okay, here's additional information, and this is the basic format that you have to know. If you have any additional questions on MLA style, you should definitely get in touch with me before Thursday evening when the paper is due, because you will be graded on the documentation. I am, the rubric for how you'll be graded is on the Getting Started page. Okay, so be sure to ask questions if you have any.